Good evening, folks. I'd like to call the Special Committee of the Whole meeting Monday, November 28th to order. We have just one item on our agenda this evening, and it has to do with the CRD's letter and request for motion to support the transportation service. So looking for approval of the agenda?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And we will start off with that presentation. Bob Lapham, thank you, and Susan Bryce for coming out from CRD, and to the members of the public, thanks for coming out as well.
Mayor Hamilton and Council, thank you very much for allowing us to come tonight to make this presentation to you. I am Susan Bryce. I'm a Saanich councillor, but I'm here tonight as a CRD director, and I'm accompanied by Bob Lapham, the CAO from the regional district. We are here, as your agenda sets out, looking to get some support, feedback, ideas from this council on a process that is currently underway at the regional district. The CRD for some time has had as a strategic priority developing a transportation service. I think all of us, even 2 years ago when all the talk about amalgamation or not, and people were strongly on one side of it or not, we all heard that intuitively people felt that regardless of how we were configured here within the region, that transportation was an issue that truly did not know boundaries. You will see from your material and from a presentation that Mr. Lapham is going to make that 58% of the trips that are made by our citizens here in the region, 58% of them are inter-municipal. People don't simply stay within their own municipality, obviously. We know they move about for all kinds of reasons, many on a daily basis going to commute to work. So the region has determined, and for those of you who haven't been on council for some time, may like to just have this bit of information. Even though people talk about the growing CRD, the expensive CRD, the CRD takes on only services that are allocated to it by the municipalities. There needs to be buy-in at the municipal level for a service. There are some designated services which the province requires a region to have, but other than that, the municipalities over the years have determined that these are services that they wanted. So we thought, how do we move from a concept to a reality? And board chair set up a committee to look at how we could bring in a transportation service. And Mayor Hamilton and I were asked to serve on that committee. And as a committee, we looked to see how we could possibly bring something out to the municipalities where we could get buy-in and not be adding to that concern that all municipalities have about increased taxation and growing bureaucracy. So we came up with this concept, which at this point sees this service being revenue neutral. It takes resources from already existing planning within the CRD and focuses it on transportation. It also allows for the potential for our region to speak with one voice for projects which could have regional significance. And so we knew when we as a committee sat down, we thought, how do we give this comfort to not only the CRD board but to the municipalities that there are some constraints on this particular service? So our plan would be, if and when the CRD did consider a regional transportation service, that we would take the bylaw and we would take a policy, a companion policy, forward at the same time. And the companion policy limits the amount that the CRD could get into in terms of any expenditures. When Bob makes his presentation, he'll have an opportunity to explain just exactly what what this might involve and why we as a region might, for instance, hear from the federal government 6 months from now that they're going to, let's say, give X millions of dollars to areas. Speaking with one regional voice and in concert, we're way stronger than we are as one individual municipality looking to get into those kinds of regionally significant dollars. Oftentimes, in fact, always in my experience, if a federal or a provincial government are coming forward with dollars, they're looking for matching dollars. So if the region were interested in something, were interested, did meet the policy, did meet the trigger, and did decide to go forward and seek some federal or provincial dollars, that would not be the time to be going out to all the municipalities trying to get buy-in to a concept. So at this point, it's pretty much status quo, allows for a platform to be provided so that in the future, if regionally we decide that there are opportunities we want to take, that we have the structure in place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he'll give you the details. And I think you'll be pleased to see that he has been able to provide some Colwood-specific data, which I think is always most interesting to any municipality.
Whoop, we're zooming all ahead here. Thanks very much, Susan. And the region has been involved in transportation for quite a number of years through our planning function. And really in that area, we do research and gather data on behalf of all the municipalities with respect to travel demand management. We do an origin destination survey to see where people are coming and going from. And we do traffic modeling. So we're able to provide that out to various government agencies and to municipalities to do some of their engineering work. And that's where some of these facts come from. So this is gathered through an origin destination survey, directly canvassing households, taking that data and compiling it, so you can really get a sense of where people move around the region. And we provided this from a Colwood-specific basis, so relevant to your consideration tonight. We also adopted a regional transportation plan back in 2014, and that plan was done in partnership with the Ministry of Transportation because they needed more insight into what regional priorities were, and the plan involved the consultation around the region to figure out how we respond to traffic demand, what traffic demand looked like going out into the future, and to really focus on what a multimodal network would look like, as well as how we would face the challenges that are going to impact the economy, people's time, and other considerations going forward. So these are just some facts with respect to some of the parallel considerations that we're having to make. You'll know that there's a lot of effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to curb climate change. That's directly related to transportation. Transportation accounts for the most greenhouse gas emissions, along with buildings as our second highest contributor. It's a high part of people's daily expenses in terms of what they spend and the time they spend to get around the region. You can see that from these numbers. And again, these are derived from that data collection information we've been compiling for a number of years. You can see that in the Victoria Foundation's ranking of sort of what the most important issues are in Greater Victoria, transportation was high on the list, and it had a low grade in terms of what our regional response or intermunicipal response is to transportation and relieving congestion and dealing with those issues noted on the previous slide. And it's really documented that without taking any action, we're increasing the number of trips, individual single occupant trips, as well as number of trips generated by our growth. And you can see when you look at the modeling, you're essentially in a complete stagnation of traffic and other kinds of multimodal constraints are out there around our trail systems, which are now becoming hugely congested, as well as conflicts between cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles, now pretty much an everyday occurrence around the region. The public is pretty clear on what they want. They want congestion issues relieved and addressed. They want a reliable and affordable choice so they can choose what kind of transportation mode they access. They want to be able to make that choice in terms of the impact it has on their daily budget. And they want to know that there's a seamless and predictable connection between modes And that's one of the concepts that was built into the plan, was a system of mobility hubs around the region where you could make a change from various forms of transportation and efficiently move around between jurisdictions or across the region. Oh, a bit of a lag in the... So even in your own plan, you recognize that a lot of the issues that impact Colwood are not issues that can be resolved by Colwood, and it takes coordination and collaboration between jurisdictions to really respond to that. With those trips occurring out of the city and around the region, it takes a collaborative approach to determine when that traffic demand is occurring, how to address the demand, and how to respond to the needs people have in terms of getting around. So we noted here that the mode share targets you have in your plan need further investments in the trail system, further investments in the transit system, as well as in the road system. And you've had some public feedback sessions, and you've canvassed what residents see as priorities in terms of how you've done your planning, how you've directed your investments locally. And we're trying to take that collective input from all the municipalities and electoral areas and then build that into a set of priorities and regional actions that address that in a collaborative way. We have experience in that with the park system, with the hospital capital finance, where we've taken various interests around the region and then tried to come up with capital planning strategies and investment strategies that are both considerate of the tax impact, as well as addressing how investments are made in the future between region and local municipalities. You can see that there is still a lot of travel to get to and from work. I know a lot of municipal strategies are to create more work in their communities and allow people to stay in place and essentially travel less. But given the diversity of the economy and given that we're an island community, sometimes those opportunities don't reside in each location. So people are going to be working in the aviation sector near the airport. They're going to be working in the service sector in the downtown core. And they're going to be working in the D&D where you've got a naval base. So there is travel demand required. We can try to curb that by looking at commercial and economic development strategies, but still it's going to result in a lot of movements around the region. Just the trips to and from schools, given people's choices around what educational institution they attend, generates an enormous amount of traffic demand and is used to guide transit planning as well as our route planning with respect to the multi-use trails. And again, we have labor force statistics that kind of show where that demand is. These slides really show, from a trip generation point of view, the diversity in travel. The recent trend has been more trips heading to the central part of the peninsula. Saanich generates more and more trips other than downtown Victoria. And then there's a lot of trips coming from the peninsula and Victoria out to the West Shore with construction activity and other kinds of infrastructure work going on. People are crossing each other in different directions. So really, this presentation points out that Colwood really relies on the system of the network that's out there. We've heard from Langford, the number one issue is people spend a lot of time on the highway system or on this network to get to and from their job sites, a lot of time that they could be applying to the job and making that billable time. And we're trying to prioritize those investments in a way that they can be considered by the province, they can be considered by other funders, and then provide an overall strategy. Transportation hubs are critical to that. So, the basic concept is a park and ride or a place where you can get off transit and then get onto a bike or walk the balance of your trip. And so those mobility hubs will become centers of where you'll see economic activity, other kinds of service activity to reduce the trip generation in between destinations. And so I mentioned the transportation plan that was adopted by the board in 2014 and endorsed by the provincial government. It did identify a multimodal network. This is a network of major road corridors, trail corridors, as well as pedestrian and mobility hub points. That network has been, in some cases, picked up in official community plans, but really the collaboration that it takes to make sure that those corridors perform to a performance standard or meet their objectives isn't really reported on, because each municipality or jurisdiction will make their own decisions on that. Transportation plan would set some kinds of targets, but still rely on the operating entities, whether it's a municipality, transit, or other service providers, to decide how they want to deliver that. So each operating entity is going to have its own mandate to, in the case of transit, carry out the transit service, operate the buses, make decisions on service levels, but they're going to rely on this network certainty or certainty investment in corridors to do their long-term planning. The example being transit lanes. I'm using transit even though it's as a point that it's a separate operating entity with a separate business plan and separate objectives, but it still relies on the multimodal network as a basis to make its future decisions and planning decisions on a long term. This was brought forward in Colwood, so you can see the multimodal network. We have a complete data sharing agreement between municipalities where we can identify road demand requirements, bring your network requirements into the plan, and that's some of the base information that goes into policy decisions that would be taken up as Chair Bryce indicated when we have major investments or opportunities for grants. So just to sum up the current situation, a lot of people have said that it's not always practical to take transit. There's not much of a bike network there that people can rely on. There's no identified mechanism to prioritize and identify critical infrastructure. And the road network isn't really conducive to intermunicipal travel. People are using shortcuts or back roads or other kinds of systems to get around, and there isn't really a full appreciation of multimodal network across the region. It's more by happenstance than by a planned approach. So in terms of a service, what would a service do? And that's really what we're getting down to here is the proposal is to take the existing work we do now as a planning body, and we also do work as an operating body where our Parks Division operates the multimodal trails, and really take those two areas of activity and put them together to allow for a better alignment between those transportation decisions at the CRD. As mentioned, we're not looking for an increase in tax requisition. It's to take those funds and reallocate them to the service. The critical thing it does is give us a voice once we take that data and once we take that experience in operating, and allows the board to consider what priorities might be, to listen to the municipalities and bring those priorities together, and to make that presentation or advocacy when there's a grant opportunity or whether there's a decision-making process at a senior government level. It allows us to deliver the programs we have now. Right now, we operate them under those two separate entities. We tend to get grants or investments in the trail system that are delivered through our parks function, and we tend to get grants or program support to deliver active transportation programs or other kinds of investments in data management or data collection on the planning side. And the key thing is it allows us to advocate and leverage for that regional transportation priority and to seek funding partnerships with other agencies and government. So there is a three-phased approach, and there's been a lot of focus on phases 2 and 3, and I really want to focus on phase 1. And as mentioned, we've got a parallel policy document to allow the board to consider when and if they'd like to move into additional phases of expansion of the service. So right now, the proposal would be by bylaw to establish a service with the existing functions and with the ability to speak to transportation issues at a regional level. If we were to proceed further, we'd be looking for consent of the municipalities to move forward on other phases under that policy framework. And as you know, with various bylaws, when it comes to borrowing, there's consent required on behalf of the municipalities by each council. There's a process to do that provides checks and balances in terms of the scope and extent of the service. People wanted to know what the long-term vision was, so the transportation planning documents and the information we provided does look out into the future, because people really want to know what is the plan to resolve or improve access to other modes of transportation, and what's the plan to try to reduce the amount of congestion that occurs today, or keep pace with it at least. So we've laid that out in terms of what a service might look like long term, but the focus of this initiative is really on that existing service level we provide right now. And this is kind of the checks and balances. You have that in your package, but it talks about the work we do today, what those additional phases would constitute, and then how we would finally get to project development in the long term. And a lot of people look at this insurance because I just left a regional disaster management session today, and like a big snowstorm or a regional disaster or interjurisdictional disaster, we all share an interest in the transportation system. It has a huge impact on our economy. It has a huge impact on people's daily expenses, and it has a big impact on time. So overall, it has a large impact on the regional economy, a large impact on the productivity, and the choices people make as to where they live and how they get around. So right now, you can see that this is meant to represent, because of the population of the region and the contributions that are made for these types of services. The orange bar is Colwood's participation on a scaled bar of percentage contribution to this service. So it's about 3.1% of the total regional pie, if you will, in terms of the cost allocation for this service. The bulk of the population resides in Saanich and Victoria with about 200,000 people, and then your population directly relates through your assessment base to the contribution you make to the service. And you can see there's different priorities. They're shared, they're pooled, and they're external. So when you look at leverage, you've got to take all of those different elements that are there in transportation. Everything from how are we going to address climate change and what investments are required to do that. How are we going to address economic development and what's required to do that. And how do we take those shared priorities to come up with a desired system. And why the CRD? A lot of people may see the CRD as a body that is that's independent, and really it's a collaborative, and it's a facilitative body among the municipalities. So decision making is bringing each jurisdiction's interests together to one regional table, and then coming up with a desired outcome and a desired result that considers all of those interests. So we have a decision making structure in place. All municipalities, electoral areas have a voice at that table. We can leverage off our existing services and existing support functions. We're able to leverage between service areas in terms of the capacity that already exists. And it's really mode neutral. We're not the Ministry of Transportation responsible for roads. We're not the Transit Authority responsible for transit. So we look at it from a broad perspective of different modal investments and interests. And governance, really, that's what this is about today, is to seek input from municipalities to understand what the issues and priorities are and bring them forward in a structure that can have decision-making made between those different interests. So the intent here and the work we've done so far is to get direction from our board through our representatives on what the bylaw content would be, what the scope of the authority would be, and that's how we came up with the existing step to merge those services together. We prepared a draft bylaw, and then we take that bylaw forward to the board. The intent is to take the input and any kind of comments coming out of this process and request, take that back to the board and report out to see if we can address those issues and come up with a solution that's aligned with everybody's concerns. And it may require adapting or adjusting the process, which is what we're able to do with bylaws or with our debate at the board table. And so this is the request, basically simply asking for support for the establishment of regional transportation service. The bylaw is forwarded to you. The bylaw defines the scope of that. It doesn't provide for other authorities. And I mentioned earlier that the checks and balances in that are a policy document that talks about when and if we would seek funding for major grants or to leverage proposals, and how we would then proceed into the future in taking into account all the major concerns that impact regional transportation. So that's the presentation. I can take any questions. It's we have some devoted staff. Our general manager of Planning Protective Services, Kevin Gillette, is actually at soup tonight, and some of our other staff are at another municipality. That's where we're kind of spread out around the region. So I should be able to respond to the issues. So.
Thanks, Bob. What I would first like to do is, members of the public, this is a committee of the whole, so it is an open kind of discussion. So if there's any immediate questions from any of the members of public to the presentation, or points of clarification? I'll take those now. Can you please come to the microphone and state your name? Thank you.
I'm Mark. So Bob, how do the skills at the CRD compare with the skills in various municipalities with regard to transportation planning?
So CRD has a regional planning unit with professional planners, and we have professional engineers on staff that support all of the services. We tend to have a pooled approach with our engineers or other experts where they're used for water engineering, sewer engineering, transportation engineering, and depending on the specific requirements, that pools access for that project. We do collaborate with municipal engineers. I believe they meet at least twice a year, but if not more often, intermunicipally. And a lot of the standards and all the considerations around a particular service, whether it's transportation or water, are based on that input between the engineers. So it's really bringing the collective experience of municipal engineers together with the regional parties, and which act more as a facilitator to bring those concerns forward in a way that we can report to the board or prepare documentation that's beneficial. So we have a senior transportation engineer that's had a history with BC Transit, that's been active with us for a number of years. We have a regional planning manager who's worked in a number of jurisdictions, including Kelowna, with oversight over transportation. I've been working in various transportation fields for about 15 years myself. So, and we've been on various committees. And I think really it's a process of taking the collective understanding, both at a municipal level and having the regional staff, pull that together and do some of the pulling together of information that represents all those interests. One example would be when we had the Regional Strategic Priorities Fund. It was a regional fund provided by the province for investment in major transportation infrastructure. And we brought all the region's CAOs together and were able to develop criteria to prioritize major investments and distribute those around the region in an equitable way. And that was a successful experience, bringing everybody together to make that decision-making process goes more smoothly.
So how do your skills compare to municipalities? So you told me all this what you have, but how does that, what would be the ability of Collier or Langford or any of the other to actually be able to do this on their own?
Sure. It varies. So you'll have a smaller municipality might have very limited engineering capacity, and they might contract out for a lot of that. A mid municipality might have an engineer on staff, but that engineer might not have transportation experience, and they would again maybe have someone on contract to support that. And I think the model in the future would be wherever there's common information or information that will benefit everybody. That's where typically it ends up at a regional table. We provide that out as best we can to support those departments.
Yeah, you're not getting away from the mic.
I may have a few more. So then the other question is, if the Colwood population is only 4%, and there's transportation problems throughout the whole region, what influence is Colwood going to have when they've only got 4% and Saanich and everybody else is going to be putting pressure on it? They've got a lot more population, potentially a lot more sway as well.
So really that's the benefit of having a regional table. So the impacts don't directly correlate with the population. So Colwood is more impacted, I think, by congestion and by other kinds of transportation constraints. It's a growing municipality. It's got a lot of activity going on. A lot of people coming here to work, to construct and do activities. So that percentage of representation isn't necessarily related to the impact. And I think at a regional table, there's always been a history of looking through issues from a regional perspective. The board members come to the table to think regional, to look at regional solutions, and respect the role Colwood plays in the overall economic development of the region and its intent to accommodate a large part of the population. So there's a balance of interests at the regional table that take that into account.
Yeah, you sort of answered the question. It's once again, is how much sway will we have? There's the need, but it seems like larger municipalities, from my understanding of the whole sewage treatment plant, had a lot more sway and there was a lot more influence going on just by their size, where Colwood's pretty small. And how are you going to do, what can you do to ensure that Colwood's high impact is really going to get priority?
Well, I can't ensure it, but I think the issue of identifying priorities is going to be common. So, the decision by the provincial government to upgrade the Mackenzie interchange is an example where it's not in Colwood, but it clearly has an impact on Colwood. So the kinds of regional priorities, the kind of the criteria we've used in the past is those kinds of infrastructure investments that benefit the most or multiple municipalities are the ones where the region really is equipped to make a difference, whereas issues at home in a municipality are typically handled by the municipal engineers or the municipal transportation department, what have you, because that's within their authority and purview. This consultation, the chair indicated when we set out that we need to find a way to get everybody involved in this initiative, or we're going to have gaps or constraints in making a lot of progress. So I think it's just a motivation to solve this problem regionally. The public doesn't really recognize boundaries when they're moving around the region, and from my, maybe it's more of an elected official experience in terms of how they deal with delegations, correspondence, people wanting something to be done.
This issue of who has the most to gain at the CRD table, and there's always a tendency to think that the big municipalities have got more impact. I would say on this issue of transportation, even though Colwood has 4% of the population, that is not just Colwood's residents that are causing this congestion. Somebody who lives in Oak Bay, let's say that person will be asked to be a part of this service. That person might say, I never go out to the Western communities. Why should I contribute to some kind of a resolution to regional transportation? I think we've all come to the point to realize that we as one collective, one regional area, for us to have a healthy and sustainable community, we have got to be able to move throughout this region for recreation, to get to work. Somebody who's got a electrical company and lives in Saanich, the customer is in Colwood, is impacted just as much by the inability to move throughout the region as the person going from Colwood and trying to get to their job in downtown Victoria. Everybody is moving. We're sort of hyperactive as a society, and there's a lot of interaction between the municipalities. So I think every voice, every single voice at the regional table will have the same need to have the issue resolved. And resolved meaning we have to have a plan, and the plan has to be sustained over years for us to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And certainly we're not there now. So if now is good enough, we will never get out of this gridlock. We have to think of other ways of doing things. And we are hoping that collectively at the regional district table, everybody pooling their effort, everybody pulling their information, everybody sticking to a plan that we can make our community more livable.
Any other members of public? Need your name, first of all, please.
Yeah, okay, Rick Marchand. Oh, sorry, interrupting you. Bob, thanks for the presentation. I thought that was a very good start for the discussion. My antennas start to twitch when I hear about getting something for nothing. Phase one, no additional money. All we have to do is combine services. When I look at the proposed bylaw that's part of the package, there are a whole list of services in there. I think some of those overlap with what municipalities are already doing. So as a taxpayer, can you elaborate for me how you would ensure that there isn't overlapping services, or is that just by intent that you're going to provide a second layer of services on transportation policy and data collection, et cetera, et cetera?
So you don't get something for nothing. Right now you're paying for the work that's done in the planning division of the region as well as in parks. So you're paying through a contribution for those services. We're putting them together to create some synergies in the organization itself. So get people that are working on like issues working together to take advantage of that. The second is we're looking through this process to create a more structured advisory process where we can bring forward sub-regional priorities or municipal priorities on a basis that can get to the table in a more constructive way. Right now, we simply collect data, put that data out. We do our own park usage surveys and take that information and consult, but we don't really drive the priorities from a municipality or from a sub-regional level up into the system. And from the top, we're unable to really take those priorities and push them into the other decision makers, so into the provincial government consideration, into BC Transit. So the voice part of it is critical to take that information and advocate for not only the collective but the individual interests that are there. Municipalities, for example, could do that on their own. So council could go write the minister or attend or get involved in a process. But we found that when you get into pooled funding or criteria around grants, there is a difference in capacity among the municipalities to put the criteria together, to put the amount of staff time into making the grant application even is a significant undertaking. So where those can be commonly identified and developed, there's going to be some benefits in that process. And
So with all the good benefits, what stopped us from doing this before now?
Well, I think it's there are issues at home in each municipality, so there has been progress. So the provincial government has seen fit to give grants to local municipalities to come in and make their own investments in the highway system, and those have been good investments to date. I think the concern is that do they really reflect the priorities of each jurisdiction when they're given full information on the regional implications, and how do they impact local issues around economy or growth plans. So we tend to look at what are the interests of the municipality in terms of its long-term plan, what contribution it wants to make, what its goals are relative to the transportation network. Some have looked at constraining traffic or constraining access to transportation facilities. Some are trying to improve that. So there's a balance of interests that go into that evaluation.
Don Duncan on Roverlack Road. My question is, you said that Colwood's got 4.4% of the population, but our infrastructure and everything else, we feed all of Souk onwards, we feed Machosen, a lot of portion of Langford, and the majority of Colwood. So even though that we're only 4.4% of the population, we're a growing community. How is this going to feed into your plan? Because other people, I agree with this gentleman, nothing is for free. Are you going to tax other people as well because they all feed through us? Or what is the illustrious CRD plan? Thank you.
Well, I think it's really, you're correct. There's more of a burden on this municipality to maybe invest in transportation than is reflective of the share of participation. So, that's one of the benefits of a regional, service, is that if there's a collective vision by all the participants, it can overcome those, individualistic, relationships between the amount of money you have to invest or the burden you have to take on. Everybody's doing it because, as Chair Bryce said, there's a lot of recognition that it doesn't just affect someone in that municipality. It affects everybody directly or indirectly. So, for a smaller jurisdiction that has a lot of transportation touch points or facilities, this kind of initiative hopefully gives a better venue or better voice to make that clear to either the funders or the decision makers that you're impacted disproportionately. And that's the kind of message we take forward.
Can you grab the mic, please?
So my wife commutes from our place into close to Royal Jubilee. Her drive from our house to, say, 6 Mile, where it joins the highway, in early September was 10 minutes. It's now 30 minutes in 2 months. And it's clearly because of all the other people who are on that road network. There's a lot more houses coming in Colwood, down in Royal Bay, down in but so that's all going to happen really quickly, and you can see it's already tripled in 2 months. So, assuming you got the CRD got the go-ahead, I'm assuming if you're proposing this, you've already got some ideas. What are those ideas that are going to fix the problem, and how long before they're fixed? Because if in 2 months it's already tripled just to get across Colwood, that's not including going down the highway and everything else. What are your plans?
So some of the things that when we don't have a service, so we're not able to take this on with this kind of initiative that we would if we were mandated. But we do work, of course, with the other agencies. So I know there's been, and these maybe seem minor, but there's a lot of minor things. So coordination of traffic signalization. I know municipal engineers try to consult each other on coordination of traffic signalization. They try to understand by the demand model, where they can be most effective to relieve that. BC Transit in its bus lane priority and priority signal investments and kind of real-time monitoring of transit times is trying to do their part to provide an option to people who want to take transit, who want certain enhancements to the service to make it that option. The board just recently announced that it's going to borrow $6.1 million to finish those gaps in the in-rail and rail trail corridor. So you realize there's been investment through grant funding over the course of about 5 years now to get those segments built. Because of these demands, the board is going to invest $6.1 million from a regional fund into completing those gaps of the in-rail trail and make an ongoing pitch to the provincial government about how much, as you said, the growth in that facility is potentially relieving one car at a time, people off the system. So, those are just examples of where we're going. I think what we could do through a service is enhance a lot of those things. It does create a mechanism directly between the CRD and BC Transit to work out those priorities from a capital point of view. Where there's a constraint from a capital point of view that BC Transit can't tackle, the region might be able to tackle it. Or if there's an ability to interconnect mobility hubs or corridors that are at a municipal level, we can point those out and try to take investment that the municipality might not be capable to make now and see if there are other funders or other parties that can make that investment to fill that gap. So those are some examples. I think you can say there's a lot of work in planning, a lot of work in kind of operating the facilities we have, but until we get that collective conversation going on, it's hard to see how far we can get with it.
Microphone, please.
The 6.1 million E&N trail, that's just the bike trail you're talking about?
No, I'm just making a point that we have been invested in various segments of the E&N trail.
And that's a bike trail you're talking about?
So multi-use trail, bike, walking, things like that. But we're able to get grant funding of about $18 million over 5 years to build segments of that. And given the demand and the increased evidence of how much that's being used, the region saw fit to borrow some funds region-wide to invest in the balance of that facility. So it doesn't impact the peninsula, but the peninsula is contributing to that because they see similar benefits from the Lochside investment or the Galloping Goose investment. And it's kind of like regional parks. If you're investing in a regional park in one area, you're investing in another area, eventually the system is there for all parties. So there's clearly willingness by municipalities that don't get a direct benefit in that investment right now to make that investment because it affects the whole system. So that's an initiative to complete those gaps and get as many people onto that system as we can.
I mean, it's a great trail, but even if it's fixed, it's not going to make a dent in the traffic problem.
No, it won't. It'll be multiple facilities. So the transit priority lanes, the cycling lanes, and then the traffic signalization, things like that. It's going to be a lot of small steps or investments and just an awareness of where the critical congestion points are. The other thing is that municipalities are encouraging, through their zoning, different incentives for companies to locate, try to create employment centers locally, which was the municipal way to kind of curb that as well. There's a whole bunch of things required.
Any other members of our public? I see the microphone in the air.
Gail Johnston. Do we need a regional transportation plan? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Is the CRD the right venue to do this job? I'm not convinced. The West Shore is where all the growth is, like those other two gentlemen were saying, Colwood, Langford, Sooke, Machosen. And yet Langford has chosen not to endorse this plan. So I guess without Langford's participation, how much can you offer Colwood? And can you offer it in a timely fashion? Like, we need help urgently now, not 2 years from now when you might get this committee together. What can we do now in the short term? Thank you.
I'm not sure you have an answer for that one right now that
Well-
hasn't already been.
Well, I think just this process and exposing the issue to the public and to councils is going to create some discussion, some sense of urgency on identifying, what are the priorities, what are the concerns and interests, and then the board's challenge to work through that. So, part of the opportunity here is to bring the voice forward, to bring forward, those that support moving forward on this issue, and then to identify those if they have concerns. Can we address those concerns? Can we come up with a different approach that satisfies that? And we heard some of that when we attended Langford Council. There was a number of ideas and thoughts presented there around how there might be more confidence. One of them is in the plan, which talks about having sub-regional kinds of priorities identified. So encouraging Langford, Colwood, View Royal to work together with Sooke to say, okay, sub-regionally, can we agree on what our priorities are? And then can those be then carried forward with a stronger voice to the regional table and get better traction that way? You can argue that sub-regionally you can do it on your own, but I think when you look at the movements and look at the view of the region, it's going to take the sub-regional tables to come together to make a difference and change it.
Thank you. Anyone else and members of the public? We've got another one.
As you can see, this is the topic out of my mind. So if CRD doesn't go forward with this and the council doesn't approve it, so what are your plans? We've got 2 roads in and out, Veterans Memorial and Sooke Road down to the highway, and you've given authority for 2,800 homes at Royal Bay plus so much else. Traffic's already tripled in 2 months. So what are you going to do if CRD doesn't do it?
Okay, we can't talk about that. We're doing a presentation on this other transportation plan, but those will come up.
In this meeting?
Pardon?
In this meeting?
No, because we have a master transportation plan that's already been completed. You can get a copy of it and go through that, but there has been identified what the future holds for roads and networks in Colwood.
The future.
Well, not yesterday, but tomorrow.
Clearly, but there's an immediate need, and I hope you're aware of that.
Oh, no, we know. Any other members of the public? Anna, did you have something else, Susan?
Unless there was somebody else from the public who
I know you have to go run.
I'm going to thank you very much for allowing us to come here, and I hope we've given you some food for thought. We're all aware as well that another piece of the puzzle that will come forward for us as municipal governments in the near future, we had thought it would be November, but presumably it's now January. The province has been doing their study on integration, and I would think that they may have something to say about transportation. To me, it's sort of logical, and I'm sure that's probably occurred to most of you as well when you met with the group from the independent group from the province. So thank you, Colwood Council, for giving us your attention. I'm going to slide, not because I'm not interested in the discussion that's going to take place, but I've got my own council meeting to go to. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck on getting there.
And I'll give one final call to any members of the public that want to ask anything more at this time. And seeing not, then I'll open it to council if council has any questions to Mr. Lapham. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I was interested in the companion policy that went with the bylaw. And looking at the policy, it still comes down to the standard weighted vote at the CRD board on any project that comes forward. Is that correct? Is that my reading of the policy correct?
Yes, there's a consent process, and at the end of the day, it's a 2/3 weighted majority vote on financial matters. So that's still there. It's just the way we're set up statutorily to function. I think that the spirit of it, and again, on guarantees, I can't guarantee things, but as with this initiative, we're really trying to set the bar at making sure we got full support. So that was the case back when we were making decisions on major investments. We looked for a consensus view, and we had unanimous support for those major transportation investments in the past. So I can't guarantee that, but that's the statutory process we're working within.
Okay. So, and I thank you for their presentation. It is very interesting, but it doesn't show me, there isn't a goal yet defined. I mean, other than make things better and apply for federal or provincial funding to assist in agreed upon goals. Do we not still have a problem in terms of the pedestrian and cycling master plan and some differences in terms of which portions of that plan get finished first?
No, we've got that plan coming forward to the board for approval. There are some specific goals in the transportation plan. If you have a chance to look at that, it sets out, getting agreement on the network, getting agreement on mobility hub locations, getting agreement on how do we set priorities. So there are goals there. And a lot of this is an art. So if we could fix the traffic congestion with some kind of immediate investment, we'd be doing it, I think. And so I think it's going to take a combined effort from a lot of different perspectives.
So you mentioned transportation hubs, and certainly transit has been very challenged to provide services to our very diverse and growing municipalities in the West Shore and other areas. And I'm just wondering if there is consideration to creating those mobility hubs along high transit corridors. So Souk Road would be a high transit corridor, for example. So would you purchase land to produce that result?
Absolutely. The intent is to work with agencies that have responsibility or avenues to do that. We don't always just go out and do that ourselves. So we with hospital sites, it's a joint venture with the health authority. With other kinds of services, it can be joint ventured with other participants. So, but the hubs are where you have a confluence of different transportation modes. Sometimes they're driven by economic development initiatives, where you've got a town center initiative or a economic development initiative that marries up with transportation. That's very effective too. So they've been identified around the region.
So I'm sorry, didn't follow you when you said town center. So you have already identified town centers that you're supporting?
Based on OCPs. So that's the consultation that went on back in 2014, was look at community plans, look at where identified build-ups were in urban centers or different communities, and identify those and the compatibility of those plans with transportation.
And would you also be looking at things like overpass for the Galloping Goose Trail where it's interrupted by Souk Road?
Yeah, so safety improvements in that trail or anything that improves the ability of the trail to function is always being looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members? Josh Martin?
Thank you. So I'm going to express sort of the same sort of concerns that some of the public has expressed just around things being cash neutral. Because I understand that synergies can bring things down, but it usually means you have to sacrifice something else to make that happen. So having a presentation that says it's not going to cost us anything, it actually makes it more of a concern for me than less of a concern. And as well, it's my understanding that a ramp up up to year 3, it could almost be a $10 million cost. And I'm curious if you can sort of address that, and how are you just saying we would be responsible for 4.4% of that, or how would that move forward?
A couple of questions there. So as I mentioned, the steps in the process are based on leveraging, or based on that policy document to say, if we can identify through a regional voice a priority, then there are funders, there are willing senior governments willing to make that investment based on a clear path forward. So we've set that out. And you're correct, if there was, say, a $10 million requisition or some other part of that's how that cost would be levied, in terms of a proportionate based on a combination of population or assessment. It's not a design capacity benefit from your sewer deliberations. Right. The principles in that bylaw are design capacity benefits. So if you build a sewage plant in one area, it only benefits that area. It's based on design capacity benefit to that area. Transportation is region-wide. So it's similar to parks. It's one requisition.
And how are you planning on balancing the requirements of a specific municipality versus the regional needs? So, for example, I'm just going to make something up, but you can look at Old Island Highway, and as you enter Old Island Highway, that would be a wonderful thoroughfare. If you could make that somehow a thoroughfare and just push people all the way downtown. But View Royal is going to have to say, we don't want it to be a thoroughfare. We want people stopping in our community. We want people shopping. We want that to be not a thoroughfare. So who takes priority in that? Is it going to be the individual municipalities who are going to be able to dictate and say, we don't want that? Or is it going to be the region saying, well, tough luck, we're going that way?
Well, so this proposal isn't to take away the jurisdiction over local roads that municipalities have control over. So that road used to be a provincial highway. It was devolved back to the municipalities, and then they put their have ownership of that corridor. So the decision making is going to be a combination of those with jurisdictional interest together with regional information or an awareness of what the impacts of those decisions are on the overall network. So the concern is now that if somebody creates constraints or limits movements in a certain area, they may do that without knowing the overall impact on the network or the overall impact outside their individual jurisdiction. And typically when you can demonstrate that, there may be another type of investment or another kind of policy decision to compensate for that, in terms of how we invest in another corridor or another type of transportation facility.
But sorry, who would have ultimate say?
With respect to the road, in the municipality, it's the municipality.
So even if the transportation plan recommends something, and the CRD is trying to move that forward, then the municipality still overrides that.
So there's no intent to take away that authority with the plan.
Awesome.
Any other members of council? Councilor Lugan?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Bob and Susan, for coming out tonight. I think we can easily say that all of us are impacted by what's happening in Colwood. My wife works at the Jubilee. I fortunately work in Duncan, so I go against the traffic. But it was pointed out that Colwood is shouldering a significant burden of the region's traffic from other municipalities. And I don't think that anyone's arguing the notion of a regional transportation service is a bad idea. They probably think it's a good idea. But I think from what I've heard, it's the government, the governance structure, the decision-making structure. And although we make up a small amount at the table, the feeling here is that the West Shore matters too, and previous decisions haven't allowed us to feel that love, and And although phase one makes sense just from an economies of scale point of view and some synergies and bringing some services together, I think the trepidation is phase 2 and 3, where the big players in the fishbowl generally make the decisions that impact the little fish. And we're saying, I think, from what I'm hearing tonight is the little fish want to be heard and actually ensure that the discussion that we have at the table is meaningful. And so I guess the takeaway I would give is that if there's a different governance structure, and they do exist, CREST is a prime example where we have all the players at the table, and it's a board that I chair, and everybody has an equal vote. It doesn't matter where you're from, everybody has an equal vote, and we think regionally. And it's a different type of discussion at that table because we know no one municipality has that knowledge that they control a certain block of the vote. And it does make a difference. So I would leave that to you to ponder. I mean, the CRD does really good work in parks and water are as two prime examples. And I think, and I'm not convinced one way or another whether it would be a CRD function or external, similar to Metro Vancouver, because I recognize that if we went to a TransLink style, there would be additional costs as well, and then there's a whole governance issue. But I think if we get over the decision-making process and the governance process and allowing the smaller fish having to have a greater voice on the impact of any decision on us, I think that would certainly go a long way and certainly gaining the support probably from Langford and Colwood. And I understand that some of the other smaller municipalities may be a little shy in endorsing the notion of a regional transportation service. And if that's the case, then I think the region as a whole needs to ask itself why. Why are the small players nervous about joining the service? And peeling back that onion to discover that why, I think would go a long way in not only this service, but how other services might be introduced in the future. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I share the concerns on the governance model of the CRD. I hear we get to buy into this service from past experience. There's no way of getting out of these services once you're in. Colwood gets a very small vote on that weighted vote at the CRD, and I have no confidence that Colwood's best interests will be looked after by that kind of a vote. It really concerns me that once we're in, it's the board that decides whether to expand services. It's the board policy that will guide requisitions. It's not Colwood. You're talking 3.1 to 4% of the costs. Well, if we wrap that up to $10 million in year 3, that's $300,000 in new taxation for Colwood in 2 years. That's a pretty big chunk of money for a small municipality for something that we really don't have a lot of control over how it's spent. So I would recommend you go back and design something with a fairer means of governance. I don't think I can support a regional transportation plan service at this point the way it's been presented. And further, a good chunk of the problems of all of the municipalities are caused by the provincial government not taking care of its highways properly. They're probably 25 years behind in upgrades to the Trans-Canada. So we have no control over that. We have no control over VMP. We have no control over a good chunk of Souk Road. So it's very difficult for a municipality like Colwood to make transportation improvements when we have no control over it, and equally the CRD will have no control over those, and the region will have no control over those. Those are provincial responsibilities. It should be the province organizing this. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll just take a minute then, Bob, if you don't mind. Is is this the only way for the region to be considering something in the way of transportation thoughts or planning or whatever by processing through a bylaw? Could we not be getting those stakeholders together? And I mean, I sit at Transit, and we don't see you there. You might be there once a year or maybe with the planning staff, but is there something, a task force or something that could be established that would bring some reality to the table and have those conversations, get a better sense of the priorities and the planning? What's going on in Colwood is not 100% at Colwood's discretion. As been said, we don't control some of those major roads. What would happen if we decided to beautify Souk Road and throw a bunch of obstruction, little pretty trees down the middle, all the way through to our borders on both sides? It would, other municipalities have done that, and I'm just not clear in this process. If it defaults to the municipality's will on their roads, then it's not going to be that solid of a plan. I think we need to have more buy-in from a grassroots level. And I mean, I hear you. I have to go in, thankfully, not very often into town, but I get stuck in that traffic, and, on goes the radio, and I think about happy thoughts driving into town. But, we do all have a part to play, but, I've talked to, probably in the last 2 weeks, over 100 people that commute regularly to different areas. And the reasons that they're doing that is they choose to live out here because it's more affordable. So they do that at the offset of convenience, being able to walk out their door and across the street to work. We are predominantly residential at this time, so we know that people have to move out of our community to hit their workplaces. Often it's a mom and dad working. They're going in different directions, different times. Kids are involved. There's not enough daycares in our jurisdiction, or maybe they want their daycare closer to where their workplace is for the convenience of anything that way. So there's multiple stops that they have to make. Transit is not suitable. Riding a bike on a bike trail is not suitable. Walking, is not suitable. We have a disconnect on the Galloping Goose, a major, risky, libelous area where there's no safe crossing from one side of the Galloping Goose across Souk Road onto the next phase of it. So, there's things that we can do now, I believe, to strengthen some of those things, but I'm not sure. I listened to a talk show this morning regarding Vancouver traffic, and there was a commentary on there where they had always used transit until they got married and had a family, and they moved out of the core area out into a residential area, and now there they were, having gone from walking to work and cycling and transiting to 2 cars 15 kilometers each way daily in order to facilitate their lives. So I haven't heard clearly from people who are using their cars what it would take to get them away from those cars. And as working with transit, I know that it's a slow process, but we are incrementally working on that with getting bus lanes downtown Victoria, working. Saanich now extending through into Saanich. There's the bus on shoulder that's coming. There's the alignment of those highway signals that belong to the province that are all coming. So we haven't even given a chance for those things to actually be experienced yet, to see if there's any valid results to those plans. I got other bits, and it's already been mentioned how smaller communities are somewhat disadvantaged at the board table with the governance model that's there. Our taxpayers have no idea of the cost impact on increases that we're going to be facing. We are one of those communities that have sewage treatment costs that will be incurred in this next go-round. There's also the homeless housing strategy that will impact our community. I just don't see the magic wand that this might bring overall. But I remain hopeful and at the table to have those conversations that will, give some real solution moving forward. So if there's no other comments from council? Councillor Day?
Thanks. I just wanted to finish off. I know you've heard a lot of what doesn't work here tonight, but there are a lot of things that can work and have worked. And so I am hopeful that we'll find a way to leverage our partnerships in this region to work cooperatively and support one another to improve that transit. So I know that we haven't wholeheartedly embraced you here tonight, but I just want to say we are still, I think, very interested in working together to find solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's the theme. The conversation is going to keep going, and obviously the issues there. And as Chair Bryce mentioned, who chairs the Transportation Committee, the province is also focused on this topic. It becomes a metropolitan issue, and it gets to a scale that you have to look at everything from governance to priorities and investments. So it's been ongoing at the regional table for a number of years, and I think I think there's a combination of governance challenges as well as capacity, overall fiscal capacity, and that's why we look as local government not to sort of want to take this on without a complementary commitment by senior government to make those investments. So we're not. Right now, we share in hospital funding, we share in housing, we share in a bunch of initiatives, and part of this whole approach is to ensure that we retain that investment that probably hasn't been adequate in this region over the last number of years and needs to be pumped up. And I think that's why there's concern about getting a stronger voice, a collective voice, or something that will encourage those that are making decisions to understand the problem and appreciate the lost benefit that might be there. So thanks. I'll leave you to your council deliberations, and if you don't have any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. And I've been 5 years at BC Transit Board, and we're still trying to figure out at $2.50 what's going to make them get out of their cars and get on those buses. So it's difficult all the way around. So I appreciate you coming out and giving us information. Thanks. That concludes our agenda for the special committee of the whole meeting. So looking for adjournment. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And we'll be back at 7 for council. Stay tuned.